Hi guys. In this video we are going to talk about domain and range with respect to functions. And the most important thing that you need to know is that whenever we are talking about the domain of a function, we are referring to its x values. And on the other hand, when we are talking about the range, we are referring to the y values. Let's look at a short definition for what domain and range actually means. It says that domain and range are the set of input and output values, so the set of the x values and y values that a graph will follow. And the way that we express domain and range are identical. If we wanted to find the range of a graph, we will always express it as y is an element, this backwards e means y is an element, of the graph's lowest number on the y-axis up to its highest number. Very similar in the way that we write coordinates. The domain is expressed in an identical manner, where instead of y we say that x is an element of its lowest number on the x-axis up to the highest number. Let's look at a few examples of domain and range. In this example, we have a straight line graph called f of x plotted on our Cartesian plane, and we want to find the domain and range for this graph. So the domain for this graph, remember domain refers to its x values, we will say that x is an element of the lowest number that this graph will cover on the x-axis, which will be in that direction, will go all the way to negative infinity. Because the graph has arrows, it continues infinitely. And on the other hand, the biggest number that the graph will cover on the x-axis will go all the way up to positive infinity. And likewise, let's find the range of this graph. So I'm going to say that the range is y is an element of, while the lowest number on the y-axis that this graph will cover will be negative infinity. And likewise, the highest number that this graph will cover, because it continues infinitely, it will cover all the way up to positive infinity. Let's look at the second example. It says that we have a straight line again, but this time this graph doesn't continue infinitely. It's constrained at these 2 points. So let's go ahead and find the domain for this graph. We will say that x is an element of, well, the lowest x value on the x-axis will be negative 2. But this graph includes negative 2. So I'm going to use a square bracket instead of a curly one. And the highest value on the x-axis that this graph will cover will be positive 3. Including. Take note that I did not use a square bracket for infinity because it is impossible to actually reach infinity. You cannot include infinity in your domain and range. So a curled bracket stands for not including, whereas a squared bracket means including. On the other hand, let's find the range for this same example. The lowest value on the y-axis will be negative 4, including, and the highest value will be a positive 6. Lowest, highest. Let's take a look at a different set of examples using a parabola. And it works in the exact same fashion. We have a parabola called h of x plotted on a set of axes, and it intersects the y-axis at 0 and negative 4. So let's go ahead and find the domain of this graph. Domain refers to the x. Well, remember, a parabola, because it has these arrows, continues infinitely, and also a parabola stretches outwards in an infinite domain. So the domain will be similar to our straight line in the first example. The domain goes all the way to negative infinity, which would be our smallest value, expanding all the way to positive infinity. And on the other hand, when we are referring to our range, well, the lowest value that this graph will cover on the y-axis will be -4, including. The graph does not go below -4. -4 is our lowest value. And the graph goes up to the highest value. Remember, this means that it continues infinitely. The graph goes all the way up to positive infinity on our y-axis, excluding, because we cannot include infinity. In the last example, let us find the domain. So we have this graph k of x, and it is an upside down parabola, and it intersects the y-axis at 0 and 5. Well, let's start with the domain. And it's identical to our last one. Remember, a parabola expands infinitely in this direction. So this will be a lowest x value in that direction of negative infinity, and a highest x value of positive infinity. Let's look at the range. Well, the lowest value that this graph will go along our y-axis will be negative infinity, excluding. We always exclude infinite numbers. The highest value that this graph will go along our y-axis will be 5, including. Remember, we always write it in the format of the smallest number all the way up to the biggest number. In mathematics, a negative number will always hold a smaller value than a positive number. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.